In this Trainz Blender tutorial, we are going to be working on the balcony section of the Bodie Island lighthouse. Now, there are a lot of tutorials about Blender on YouTube, but a lot of them are not Trainz focused. We are going to be focusing on making sure the object you make can be exported and imported into Trainz 2019. I'm using Blender 2.8. This version of Blender is only compatible with Trainz 2019. Things you export using Blender 2.8 can only be imported by Trainz 2019. To make things backwards compatible, I'm not really sure. You would need an older version of Blender for starters. But I don't really play those games anymore, so I'm not really invested in making backwards compatible content for it. In a future part, I'll teach you how to make textures, including transparent textures for Windows, but that's at a later part because I had already made most of the textures by the time I started this tutorial. Now I'm going to teach you how to delete the default cube that shows up when you start Blender. First, you have to highlight it by left clicking on it. Then you right click on it and a drop down menu will appear. You will see the word delete. Clicking on that will delete the cube if it's highlighted. In addition, you could also go to the top right corner of the screen over there where you see the word cube highlighted. Left click on it and then right click on it to bring down the drop down menu and then click delete. It has to be highlighted before you can do anything to it though. Now, I know I said I'd wait till a later episode to teach you how to make textures, but before you can even do that, you first have to know how to make the textures visible by default. Because for some reason, they aren't visible by default when you start Blender. I don't know whose bright idea this was, but that's the way it works. That button that the arrow is pointing at, that's the Look Dev button, and if you click on that, it'll make the textures visible. Still, I don't know why that's not a default. In Gmax, the textures are visible by default. Either way, that's the way it works in Blender, I guess. So we have to live with it. Now, Blender is so confusing that even after doing something, I can't remember how to get it to happen again sometimes. Like, for example, here you see a split screen where you can see the textures on the right and you can see the object on the left. Despite days of trying to figure out, I cannot recreate this. I cannot figure out how to get the screen to do this anymore. If you worked on something recently, it'll show up in this menu when you start Blender. To remove this menu, you can click anywhere other than the menu and it'll just go away. You can also click on one of the projects in order to open it. Now, another thing you had to know before you export to Trainz is that you might get an error when importing that says failed to triangulate mesh because it is a polygon is missing an ear. To fix this, go up over there on the top left side of the screen where you see the word Object Mode. Click on that and a drop down menu will appear. Then click on Edit Mode. Then press the letter A on your keyboard to select everything. If everything doesn't get highlighted, press the letter A repeatedly until everything gets highlighted. Once everything gets highlighted, press Ctrl T and that will triangulate everything. In other words, instead of using squares, it'll use triangles to make the mesh. Then export it again, import it into Trainz again, and the error should go away. Over there in the bottom right side of the screen, you'll see a line of text that shows you the amount of triangles, polygons, and faces the object is using. Try to keep the polygons below 10,000 because the game really does not like it when you make something with more than 10,000 polygons. It'll trigger an error message in Trainz 2019. When I originally finished the mesh for the lighthouse, it was nearly 90,000 polygons. The game would not accept the mesh like that, so I had to reduce some of the details in a few sections in order to get it to around 48,000 polygons. At that point, the game did accept the mesh. Now, one thing that you could do to help reduce the mesh, if it has a lot of cylinders, is try to keep the amount of sides the cylinders has to 16. The default is 32 for Blender, but 16 works okay, and it'll reduce the amount of detail required to run each individual cylinder. So that's one thing you can do to help reduce the vertices. Alright, let's get started. The first thing I have to do, obviously, is to open the project. Give me a second, because I just restarted this computer, and it brought up a bunch of other tabs. Okay, now I'm going to use this method. Okay, this is the inside of the watch room area. Now the first thing I'm going to do is switch to edit mode so I can show you how these support beams are created. They're actually a bunch of rectangular cubes that have been stretched out a little bit. There's about 6 of them, all rotated to a certain angle and attached to each other. You can edit a shape in edit mode by clicking on one of the vertices and simply dragging it in the direction you want to move it. If you click on one of the arrows, it will move it precisely in one direction. If you click anywhere else, it'll move it in whatever direction you place the mouse. I usually use the arrows because it's a little bit more precise. The watch room is just one cylinder. I carved a hole in it to make the holes for the windows. That over there is the walkway above the watch room, which we have to add some support beams to so that people won't have to worry about falling off the edge, obviously. Now, in the original model I made of this lighthouse, I did not have any handholds on the edge of the balcony because I did not know how to back then, and I was too lazy to figure out how. But now that I know how, I will in fact be including those. However, sometimes I wonder if that was a good idea in the first place, because the balcony uses up a lot of polygons. In fact, it uses a great percentage of all the polygons that this lighthouse is comprised of. Now, I need to figure out where the next support beam is going to go, so I'm going to add a cube and change it to the distance between each support beam so that I can use this as a temporary ruler. Now, on the top over here in this drop-down menu, you can change the size. It automatically changes the size of all sides of the cube. It doesn't appear to be that you can tell it what size you want each side of the cube individually like you could in Gmax. So whatever size you choose, it's going to do that for all sides, it being a cube after all. So this is the distance that the support beams are supposed to be from each other. By the way, this button over here that's highlighted in blue means move, and the one beneath it means rotate. If you're in edit mode, you can also select move to move a specific vertice. You can also move more vertices than one at a time if you hold down the shift key while selecting them. See that? I can use that to change the size. In fact, this is actually how I make the specific parts of the support beam, by shrinking a cube into the rectangular shape required for each portion. Now, right now, I'm selecting these 4 vertices. I'm going to shrink it to around the same size as this section. Okay, I think I'm going to use this. I don't remember what I'm doing here. Oh yeah, if you click extrude, it'll add another section to it, rather than just moving the vertices. Moving the vertices pretty much stretches the mesh, but extruding creates a new section. Also, sometimes when you change the size of the mesh, it places the origin somewhere it should not be. You can actually fix this by right-clicking on the origin, and there's a drop-down menu, and there's a selection you can click on that says Set Origin, and you can click on Origin to Geometry, and it'll place it back in the center of the mesh where it should be. Okay, earlier I did say that I was using this mesh to make a temporary ruler, but apparently it's been so long since I filmed this that even I don't remember what I'm doing with it. Apparently I'm using it to make part of the handholds that prevent people from falling off the edge. I'm trying to line it up with the support beam over here because that appears to be what it looks like in the example photo that I was using. Gotta get it just right. You know, it probably would help if I fixed the origin also, because it's a little to the right of the object. Like I said earlier, to fix the origin, just right click on the origin, click Set Origin, and then click Origin to Geometry. It'll place the origin in the center of the mesh like it should be. This will make things like rotating a lot easier. By the way, when rotating, you can click on any one of these round shapes and it will move the object precisely on a specific axis. You can also rotate it in a random direction by simply clicking on the mesh and not the origin and rotating it somewhere. It'll just follow where the mouse is going. But I don't really like to do it that way because it's not as precise. Okay, I got it rotated right. Now I just gotta adjust the movement. Move it up a little bit. Trying to make it perfectly aligned so that the bottom is exactly on the ground. It's a little bit hard to do sometimes though. To assign a texture you already made, first click on this button and then click on this drop down menu that has the list of materials and then just click on the material you want. Of course, the object you want to texture has to be selected first, and of course to select on it, just left click on it. Now I'm going to teach you how to copy an object, which will really come in handy if you have multiple of the same type of object. Just right click on it and click copy, and then right click anywhere and click paste. It'll automatically create an exact duplicate of that object. Then you can simply move it where you want. Since these two sections of the balcony are the same, I'm using the exact same mesh for it. Oops, accidentally rotated on the wrong axis. Now, one thing you should know is that when you copy something that's already textured, it copies the material too, and then it renames the new material the same as the old one, but with a 001 at the end. Obviously, you don't want a bunch of copies of the same material because that wastes space. In the future, I will teach you how to delete cluttered lists of materials where they're all the same but with a slightly different name, and how to basically assign them all to the same exact material. But it's a pretty complicated process, and so we'll cover that later. Now I'll be making another section of the railing. I'm going to click Add, Mesh, and then Cube. I'm going to adjust it a little bit. I actually have notes that contain the sizes of all parts of the lighthouse to make it easier to know what size something is supposed to be. Now, since I can only measure one side of the cube for now, I'm gonna obviously have to edit the rest of it later, because I can't change the sizes of all the other parts of the cube when I first add it. As far as I know anyway. Anyway, I'm just going to move the cube over to the railing. This is going to be the upper section of it. Looks like I made it a little bit too long. I can fix that though. First I'm going to raise it to the proper height. Now I'm gonna go from object mode to edit mode so that I can change the rest of the sizes. Now I'm gonna hold shift while selecting these 4 vertices, and then I'm going to drag the red arrow to move it on the red axis until it's about the same size. Now I'm gonna do the same for the other side. Basically, I'm just trying to get it to stretch to the other 2 support sections of the railing. Now, of course, this is extruding a little bit too much, so I'm going to select these 4 vertices and move it back some. This time using the green axis, obviously. Yep, just squish it until it gets to the proper width. And then of course I have to do the same for the upper section because it's way too tall. Once it gets this narrow, it gets a little bit hard to click on the vertices you want sometimes. Alright, there we go. First time this time. Now just shrink it on the blue axis. And now it properly stretches to the 2 sections of the railing, but we're not done yet. This is not nearly enough to prevent someone from falling, obviously. Now I'm going to go back to object mode. Gonna adjust the height of that one ever so slightly because it wasn't high enough. Now I'm going to select a material and assign it to this mesh. Now it's starting to take shape, this walkway. The railings are actually attached to the support beams that are attached to the wall of the watch room. By the way, in case I forgot to mention, the watch room is the area below the balcony. It tends to have windows so you can look outward, which I guess is where the word watch room came from. Some of the machinery to turn the light sometimes exists in the watch room of the lighthouse, depending on what type of lighthouse it is. This lighthouse does not have any turning mechanism, so it doesn't really have anything in the watch room. Anyway, I just copied that upper section of the railing to make a lower section. This will provide a little bit more support and protection against falling off the edge, obviously. Still a little bit more needs to be done to this railing though. Now I'm going to add yet another cube to make another section. I'm going to shrink it to the size that I need, though it's somewhat pointless since you can't change the other sides individually until after you've placed it down anyway. Okay. This cube is going to go on the bottom. It's going to attach only to the lower beam, so I have to shrink it quite a bit so that it'll fit in this system. Now, back then I was having a little bit of trouble wrestling with the camera because I couldn't figure out how to get it exactly where I wanted. Luckily now I know this. To move the camera, to rotate the camera anyway, you have to click the middle mouse button while dragging the mouse. To strafe, that is to go forward, backward, left, right, up, or down, you have to hold shift while clicking the middle mouse button and dragging the mouse. That was the picture that I'm using to model the balcony. It has all of the detail that I need, and it's close enough that I can clearly see what has to be done. Now, I was using the reference picture to figure out how many copies I needed to make of these things. I need 8 of them. Luckily, cubes do not take up a lot of polygons, so I can freely add as many of these as I need without having to worry about it affecting the gameplay. Cylinders are a whole nother matter. They take up a lot of polygons depending on how many vertices you decide to give them. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. I need 4 more. You can paste the same object as many times as you need after you've copied it. Okay, I think I need 1 more. There we go. Now I have the amount that I need. Now that looks secure. You shouldn't have to worry about anyone falling off of one of these protecting them, right? Just gonna adjust the movement a little bit so it looks a little more uniform and even. Yeah, that looks pretty good right now, but we're still not quite finished yet. Now for the next section, I need a cylinder so that I can stretch it from the railing to the support beam. These sections are both attached to each other on the real lighthouse. First, I'm going to enter the radius in meters. I forgot to mention, but I'm using meters as the unit. You probably guessed that by now, obviously. You could technically use the imperial system too. However, if you're animating something, you definitely need to use meters. For some reason, animations in Trainz do not work when you use the imperial system. It has to be in the metric system. After entering the proper radius, which I estimated, it automatically shrinks to that size. Now I'm going to go ahead. Oh, and depth is the height of the object, basically. So you can also adjust the height before you place it down. So I'm going to attach this cylinder to this section of the railing so it can droop down and also attach to the support beam. Now, my measurements were slightly off with the support beam because it's supposed to attach to the cylinder on the bottom. Not quite sure how that happened. But for some reason, even though my measurements are more or less accurate when I make the actual tower of the lighthouse, whenever I get to the lantern room, some of my measurements are a little bit off. It still looks realistic enough though, in my opinion, so I'll keep it like this. Make sure it's not sticking out, obviously. Now you have 2 cylinders that attach the railings to the support beams. Just gotta adjust its location ever so slightly. By the way, I think I used 32 vertices on these cylinders. I probably could have gotten away with just 16. You really have to think about stuff like that when making content for Trainz, because you don't want to have too many polygons, as I said earlier. Now, I need a few more discs for this section, because it has like ornamental disc-shaped objects attached on the cylinder that hang downward. Now I'm adding another cylinder to make the decorative ornaments. Again, I probably should have made this 16 vertices instead of 32 to keep the poly count down, but I wasn't aware of that back then. I made the radius. Now I'm going to change the depth, which is essentially the height of the object. Just give you a second to look at my notes to see what size it has to be. By the way, these are all estimates. They may not be exactly correct, but they're as correct as I was able to get them. So this is one of the decorative ornaments that's attached to the cylinder. All I have to do is move it to the cylinder and try to make it as accurate as possible. It has to be perfectly centered. It helps to look at it from multiple angles to make sure. Okay, now I'm going to texture it like I did with the other objects. Now I'm going to copy and paste it a few times until I have enough of the decorative ornaments attached to the cylinder. Yeah, I'm gonna need another one. I forgot how many there's supposed to be. Let's see. That's a third one. And of course I just have to move them down until I get them to the correct height. Now the support beam was actually supposed to be attached underneath the last ornament. I think it was attached between the bottom ornament and the one directly above it. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 5 of them. Now I'm going to hold the shift key while selecting them. You can copy multiple objects at the same time, and then I'm just going to move them over to the other one. That saves me a lot of time, because now I didn't have to make them a second time. Oh, I think I forgot to paste. It happens. Instead of pasting, I ended up moving them over to the other side. Alright, there we go. Now they're pasted. And of course you can do this as many times as you need to. This is a huge time saver when making a bunch of similar objects as part of a mesh. We're not quite finished with the railings yet though. I added another very tiny cube to go on the top of this railing. Just a little bit up. Alright, that's more or less correct. Hold on, give me a second, wrestling with the camera a little bit. Okay, I'm going to try to rotate it accurately. Now I copied and pasted the exact same cube over to this side, and the railing and the support beams are now completed. Well, this one section. Now, you could do the same thing you did earlier for each individual section of railings and support beams, but that would take too long. There's actually a much easier shortcut, and that's to copy the entire railing and support beam section, since it's the same all the way around the lighthouse, and paste it. So I'm going to hold shift and select each thing that I want to copy at once. Oh, and by the way, if you accidentally select something by mistake that you didn't want to copy, you can press Ctrl Z and it'll unselect it. So obviously I did not know that back then when I was filming this, because now I exited out of it and I'm doing it all over again. If only I had known back then. Okay, I'm also going to copy the support beam sections. Have to be really careful and try not to accidentally click something else that I don't want to copy. Now I'm going to copy the ornamental cylindrical objects in that one tiny section, obviously. Now I only need to copy one side because the other side already exists. So the left side I'm not going to copy. Otherwise there'd be too many poles in the same location. And then of course I just have to rotate it to where I need it and move it to make sure it's accurately placed. And then I have a copied section of the support beam and railing, and I just have to repeat this step as many times as needed to get all the way around the circle, and this saves me a lot of time. Now I'm gonna move it a little bit. Now there are 24 of these sections I estimated, so I'm likely going to need to repeat this step another 22 times. But now we have another section of railing and another section of the support beams. Oops, I accidentally moved that section. Alright, that looks good. Now, if you want to save even more time, you can copy both sections and then paste both of them, and then you have 2 new railing sections instead of just 1. And then repeat that process. Anyway, that's all I have for now. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you next time. Oh, and by the way, it's pronounced Bodie Island, not Bodie Island. Trust me, I used to live in North Carolina, and not a single person I knew pronounced it Bodie. They all pronounced it Bodie Island. I don't know where people keep getting Bodie from.